we look at osmosis. So with osmosis still, it is a passive method of transport. That means that you don't need energy in the form of ATP. So we look at this scenario. So a marine biologist accidentally places a saltwater fish into a freshwater tank. The fish becomes swollen and eventually dies because of water imbalance. Describe what happens to the fish cell in freshwater in terms of osmosis. Explain how the fish in salty environments use active transport to maintain internal balance, and then also distinguish between passive and active transport, giving an example in each. So the whole point here is that we are looking at basically two topics that are combined in one question. So the first topic that we are basically looking at is an issue to do with the osmoregulation. And then the second topic is basically transport. Okay, so these topics do not exist in isolation. They are basically connected to one another. So what are the challenges if you have an organism in salty water? The challenge is that if you have an organism in salty water, the organism will have to lose water to the salty water environment, because water is going to move where there is high solute concentration, and that is basically osmosis. So with osmosis, you're having the movement of water molecules from an area of low solute concentration to an area of high solute concentration. Salty water has a lot of solids, and that's why we are saying it has high solute concentration, and the water will move from the fish into this surrounding salty water. And the problem that the fish will face is to make sure that they can maintain sufficient water in their bodies. And then when we move to fresh water, now with fresh water, what you expect is that the fish instead has high solute concentration, and therefore the water will move away from the fresh water. Water molecules will move away from the fresh water into the fish, and that's why the fish will swell, because the solute concentration in the fish is higher than the one for fresh water. Okay, so for organisms to be able to survive in salty water, so that they don't lose this water to the salty water environment, they rely on active transport. Okay, so that means that they either have to make sure that they have sufficient ion concentration or solute concentration by making sure that they get these solutes into their bodies by active transport, because that has to be against the concentration gradient. And then when that happens, they will be able to maintain the water movement balance such that they can achieve that balance that they actually need. Okay, and the difference between passive and active is because of the fact that in active you need energy and in passive you don't need energy. And because of that, it means that with active, you're moving molecules against the concentration gradient, and with passive, you have to move molecules along the concentration gradient. Okay, so for passive, it is what we see in gaseous exchange across the gills, where you can have dissolved oxygen in water diffusing into the gill surfaces and they taken by blood. And then for active transport, it's basically an example where you can have ions being reabsorbed, okay, into from the filtrate by active transport. Okay, so basically what we are basically saying is that osmosis is when you have movement of water molecules. And in this case, we are terming them as solvent molecules from a region of their high concentration to a region of their low concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. That should definitely not confuse you. What we are basically saying is that if you have one region where you have a lot of solids, so that region is having a high solid concentration, you have particles there. So the water will move from where there are few particles to where you have more particles or more solids. So like in this case, you're having you're having sucrose molecules more on one side and then very few on this side. So the water molecules will move to where you have a lot of the sucrose molecules. And that happens across a semi-permeable membrane. Semi-permeable membrane basically means that membrane which allows movement of certain particles. So when you have high solute concentration, we say that that solution is hypertonic. And then when you have low solute concentration, it means that solution is hypotonic. So what happens is that molecules move from hypotonic solution to hypertonic solution. So osmosis happens in many processes, including uptake of water by plants, uptake that is uptake of water by plants through the plant root hairs, but also maintaining that pool of on water such that it can move up the plant is also by that osmosis. And then you can have osmosis in the renal tubules or in the kidney tubules, basically. You can also have osmosis in microorganisms where they can basically get water from the surrounding environment. If plant cells actually absorb this water, it means that they will be firm, they will be able to maintain that rigidity that is support for plants, especially young plants. And then that movement of water or osmotic movement of water is very important for opening of the stomata and also absorption of water from the alimentary canal. So the difference between diffusion and osmosis is that when we are talking about diffusion, we're talking about particles, whether molecules, but when you're talking about osmosis, you're basically referring to water molecules or basically solvent molecules. So the definitions, if you're defining the two, please take note of what is moving. For osmosis, it is solvent molecules. For diffusion, it is the particles or molecules. Okay, diffusion, you don't have a semi-permeable membrane. For the osmosis, you basically need to talk about that, and the movement is based on the concentration of the solids. That means that in osmosis, from low solid concentration to high solid concentration. For osmosis, for diffusion, we are basically talking about particles moving from where they are in high concentration to where they are in low concentration. And then with the osmosis, water moves into a cell. As an example, especially